Welcome to Grace Church, a fellowship that's been serving the South Coast for over 23 years. Grace Church is more than a congregation. They're a family of believers who are ready to welcome you to a place where you can feel the tangible grace of God. Join Grace Church every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. for a time of contemporary worship and a relevant message from the Word of God. For more information, please visit gchurch.us. And now here's Pastor Ron Moore with this week's timely message.
Well, we're in a series. We've been in a series of how to thrive and not just survive in a world that's spinning out of control. How many know the world's spinning out of control? It's getting crazy out there. It feels like the whole world lost their minds. It's what it feels like to me sometimes. I look around at what's going on, I think, has everybody just lost your mind? But we need to learn how to not just thrive. See, this is what happened in 2020, actually a little bit before 2020, but during the COVID outbreak and actually the elections before that, we all got into survival mode. If we could just survive. You know, they said, well, this is only going to last 2 weeks, and I said, we can survive 2 weeks. And then it became, 6 months, and I think we just survive through this thing. And I began to see that, it'll get better, but it didn't get better, it just got different. and so we need to learn how that we can actually survive. And the sermon title today is this: I got nothing. I got nothing. Yeah, I got to thinking about that. Well, it says, I've got nothing. But I got nothing. Not at all. I haven't got that. And so we need to learn how to start with what we've got. What do we have? Because no one has got nothing. Nobody has that. That's not happening. Everybody has something. We ought to stop obsessing over what we don't have and start thinking about what we do have. And we'll talk a bit about that. I think that sometimes we come in with deficits. There's empty spots in our lives. And we think that, I feel stuck or I feel helpless, those kinds of things. And some of us financially we're broke, maybe. But more often, what really I find when people come is that people are emotionally broke. They're relationally broke. They're just in, and the worst is if you're spiritually broke, because spiritual poverty is just terrible. When we come in and we're dry and we're dead and we just don't know what's going on. And I see people that come to church and I do preach too long at times, but I see them, they're watching their watch, keep looking at their watch, wonder when is that guy going to quit? And I realize, well, we've become detached from one another a little bit. We need to get emotionally, or spiritually attached. Matthew 16 says this. It says, 16:26 says this. It says, what good would it be for someone to gain the whole world and lose their own soul? I mean, we can try everything we can to try to find satisfaction financially. If I had a dream last night. It was really a good dream. It was one of the dreams where you don't want to wake up, and I began to realize that my alarm was going off and I was getting up. But in this dream, we were at church and somebody gave the church $1 million. $1 million. What a good dream. Actually, I was just disappointed. It took me a few minutes after I woke up to realize we weren't getting that $1 million. And so then I was disappointed for a period of time. Like, why? I'm going back to bed. That was a much better world to live in there. But we come to a place where it's your soul that we're talking about. When the Bible talks about soul, it talks about your mind and your will and your emotions. And God is concerned about your spiritual well-being, but He's also concerned about your emotional well-being, your physical well-being, your spiritual well-being. He wants that to be successful, all of those places to be successful. So I want to talk about how to attract. I love this. How to elicit. I looked up in my thesaurus. Elicit. Debbie said that's not the way you spell it. It is in my computer. It didn't turn red. That little red line didn't go under it. Elicit God's provision. It's from a study we've been doing for a couple of weeks now about Elisha. And in this study, he's going to meet a desperate woman. And this woman is going to have a financial deficit. But more than that, she has a spiritual deficit. That's what it really is. And she needs God's provision. So let's get right into it. One day, the wife of a man from the guild of the prophets called out to Elijah. By the way, I'm reading this in the Message translation. So if you're following along, you're going to get lost. The Message. You got a Message Bible? Oh, my goodness, you should have come up here and read for me then. Okay. One day, the wife of a man from the guild of prophets called out Elisha. That's important that she called him out, by the way. Your servant, my husband, is dead. You well know that he was a good man and he was devoted to God. And now the man to whom he was in debt is on his way to collect by taking my 2 children as slaves. So back then, creditors, if you owed money and couldn't pay it back, creditors could take everything you owned, including you and your children. In other words, they could take, she had 2 sons, and they were coming to take, if she had anything left, they were coming to take her possessions, they were coming to take her sons and put them into slavery, and more than likely, they would come and take her and put her into slavery. And in those days, of course, we know that for a widow in that time, if they did not have family that would take care of them, they only had really one option, and that was, well, 2 options, is to go into slavery or go into prostitution, and that was it. So this is a desperate woman. She's going to lose her sons. Evidently, there's no family there to take care of her, and she calls out to Elijah, and she says, he was a good man. He was one of the prophets. He was a good man. There's almost anger if you really read into this a little bit. Now, history tells us, Josephus writes that this was the wife of Obadiah. And Obadiah was the guy who took 100 prophets and hid them in caves. We learned that from our last series on Elijah, that Obadiah was an attendant in the king's court in Ahab and in Jezebel, and he was a part of that. He was like a double agent. And so while Jezebel is trying to kill all the prophets, he's gathering them up, and he put them into 2 caves, and he took care of all their needs. During this time, again, Josephus, in writing the history of this, says that during this time he incurred a great debt, as you can imagine, feeding for several years now 100 people, and they eat. They're preachers. There you go. He couldn't keep them in apple pie, It was getting right out there. And so here she says this. She says, we lived a godly life. We were devoted to God. I mean, it's like, where's God now that I need him? I mean, we've done everything. Why isn't this fair? Have you ever thought that? Why isn't it? It's not fair what's going on in my life. I'm trying my best. I'm reading my Bible. I'm coming to church. I'm paying my tithes. I'm doing everything I know to do. And yet trouble comes. And by the way, where is God? When this whole world's spinning out of control, what people ask? Well, where is God? Why doesn't God do something? If God's going to do something, by the way, this is a good time for God to do something. Somebody told me that yesterday or day before yesterday, somebody said, did you know we're at war with Israel? And I didn't know that. No, we're not at war. Israel's at war with Hamas. And I said, I didn't know that. And they were talking about, this is big. This is like, how many, we read this yesterday. They had 2,200 missiles fired into Israel in a matter of hours. That's what you call war. Yeah. Anyway, where's God in all this? Can you imagine all these people? Where is God in all of this? Where's God in COVID? Where is God in all the disasters of this world? Afghanistan had a earthquake, and those clay huts fell in on 2,200 people and killed them. Stuff. I want to give you 3 things to consider. No, not yet. The number one thing that causes people to walk away, that's walk away from their faith, walk away from God, walk away from the church, whatever it is someone hits difficult times and they question God's goodness. It'd be easier to just get away from this stuff, see. Where's God? I'm out of here. Well, I don't know anybody. You'll say this, maybe you're saying, well, I don't feel that way, and I don't know anybody who feels that way. Well, I know somebody, and he is me. I felt that way a lot of times. Like God, I mean, I've been preaching now for 50 years. I've been 45 years in the ministry, and where are you at now when I really need you? When I'm getting a little bit older, and it would be nice to kind of sail through life. That's the way she feels. She says, I've done everything right, and yet everything's going wrong. We've lived for you. We've done everything we can do, and yet it looks like everything's going wrong. I mean, it's right down to this. They're coming. They're on their way. Those guys are coming to get my sons, tie them up, carry them off into slavery. Her world, if the rest of the world wasn't, we know this, that her world was spinning out of control. Now, if she had walked away right then, if she would have walked away, we know the story. Most of you have read the story. But we know the story that if she walked away, she would have missed the greatest blessing of provision ever, especially in her life. So if you want to see God's provisions in difficult times, this is what you do. Now we're at number one. Number one, don't walk away from God during painful seasons. Good life doesn't exempt you from difficult times. Read this morning in early prayer, but Jesus was straight up with this. He didn't mince words. He said this in John 6:33, in this world you will have trouble. Now that word will is not in the Bible because it seemed a good way to make that sentence. This is what it says. In this world you have trouble. Reason is a present active indicative verb. That means it's happening right now and today. In this world, right now, today, you will have trouble. But take heart, he says this. This is Jesus talking. I have overcome the world. Jesus doesn't promise you or me an exemption from difficult times. He promises provision to get you through them. Well, you say, well, that's easy for you, Pastor, because, well, you're a preacher and you don't have difficult times. Well, you guys know because I'm way too transparent. If I can grumble about my difficult times, I will. Not long ago, my son and my daughter-in-law and my 4 grandchildren walked into our house and told us that they were moving to Arizona and that it has already been settled. They already got their jobs and they're putting up their house for sale. Reason they were abrupt because they knew I'd try to talk them out of it. And I want to tell you that Debbie and I, our world came crashing down. It was spinning out of control. Then my other son comes not long after that, just a few months, and says, my ex-wife that I have a joint custody with my grandchildren. 2 of my grandchildren is moving to Arizona. By the way, I hate Arizona. I will never be a Diamondbacks fan. And the reason that the Grand Canyon is there is because that state is that close to hell. Anybody here from Arizona? Just thinking. Ryan said, we may have to go to Arizona with the kids. My world came crashing down. We experienced some severe financial setbacks. There was a time I thought, what in the world is going on? And Debbie and I had to finally come to a position. It was right before we went to a conference in Harrisburg. We came to this conclusion, is that we are not walking out, no matter how bad it gets. Not unless God physically comes down and moves us, we're here. He moved us here, and we're not going to let trouble distract us. How many have been to those kinds of situations where it seems like there is no way out? It is at the bottom of the barrel, and you're so discouraged and so fought on, you can't see a way out of this thing. Don't walk away from God in the middle of your difficulties. How can God give you his provision when you walk away? See, what happens when problems come our way? What happens when our world crashes around us? I just got to get away from this place. I just got to get away. I just got to isolate. I just got to get by myself. I don't want to go to church. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want away from this place. Don't you know that's what she thought? I'll take my 2 kids. We'll run. We'll get out of here. Can I give you a word from God for this church? I felt like he gave it to me. And it is literally a word. Stay. You know? God doesn't have to have full sentences all the time. I mean, he said, come. You step out of a boat. See, when things get rough, we seem to want to isolate, get away from the very people, the very church, the very God that our provision has been based upon. God wants to help this lady. And so what she does, instead of running, she calls out to the prophet, and she says, this is bad. Elisha said, I wonder, how can I be of help? I think that is a rather odd statement. Because Jesus did the same thing. He went up to the blind man and said, what would you have me do for you? He wanted to heal him from his blind eyes, but he wanted to know, what do you want? What if the blind man said, I'd like $1 million, so I can give it to the church? No, I don't think that's the way it goes. I don't think that's the way it is. He said, how can I help you? And he says this is the second thing. He says, what do you have in your house? How can I be of help? It doesn't sound like he takes a breath. What have you got in your house? Let's start with what you have. Now listen, this is what she says. Take that next slide. Everybody say this with me. Nothing. Say this. Say it again, because you didn't say it good enough. Nothing. Now this is got confused with the lady who Elijah came and said, make me a bread and then we all die. You know, it's not saying she's getting ready to die. It's just that she has so little of everything. She has nothing to give to him. He says, what's in the house? And it was such a little amount of everything that she said, nothing. Because sometimes all you can do is focus on what you don't have rather than what you have. I will. Now, my wife has never done this, but I understand that sometimes women have gone to their closet and looked in. Not my wife. Not that I'm going to admit to. But has ever looked at a closet? I look at her closet and she could clothe a village. I mean, those people could clothe the village. Like everybody. And I don't know, as a guy, I look at it and she says, I haven't got a thing to wear. I'm thinking, I don't guess I've ever said that. As long as I had Levi's. There you go. Nothing, she said. You know, when Debbie says something like that, I know well enough not to say anything after that. Although I am saying something after that. But she always knows because I look at her like, I think that's what Elisha did. I think he says, what do you have in your house? And she said, nothing. And I think he looked at her like, really? Nothing? I mean, I have people say, well, we got nothing. I got nothing. What could you do for the church? What could you do for God? I have nothing. I got nothing. Could you testify? Could you evangelize? Could you do anything? No, I got nothing. Could you have a home group? Oh no, my house. I couldn't let anybody come to my house. Because, well, personally, God only can come if there's marble countertops. Kind of thing. No, I couldn't do it. Well, I could do something if I had a spouse, or if I had a better spouse. I'll just look over here. Because I know she's looking at me like. Have you ever said, well, my kids are driving me nuts? You have, if you ever had kids. But there's lots of couples that would love to have those kids that are driving you nuts. In our pain, this is what happens in our pain. We lose perspective. We don't really have anything to give. We come to church, we sit, we leave. We don't think we have anything to give. But yet we have things to give. We can give. We have stuff that God has called us to. We just have to get the right perspective. She says this, well, I do have a little oil. Now, in the original language, it means a little bottle of oil. I kind of think it's like this. I think she came out and she said, well, I got that much olive oil. Oil was pretty useful commodity in those days. They could use it for healing wounds. They could use it for cooking. They could use it for their leather goods. They would rub it to keep it from getting brittle. Oil was a currency. They could use it as currency. We know that it was used spiritually. It was used for anointing, and oil is an object that the Holy Spirit uses a lot. So when something is little in our life, we often see it as nothing. We just see it. It's just nothing. Why? I got to tell you, really. I sometimes wonder why would God call me to do what I'm doing right now? Because when he called me, I had nothing. I mean, as far as speech, I had nothing. I stuttered most of my childhood. It made me very introverted. Didn't want to say too much. Didn't want to get in public. Never wanted to public speak. Never wanted to go to speech class for sure. And that's who God called. And I thought, I got nothing. And come to find out, as you well know, something happened. I got the gift of gab. Number 2, stop obsessing over what you don't have and start what you've got. Start with what you've got. I don't have any money. Well, you don't have any money? You haven't got anything? Because there was a lady in the Bible who was blessed by Jesus because she only had 2 pennies. It's not much. I only have a little bit of talent. I only have a little bit of time. I only have a little bit of this. I only have a little bit of that. And therefore, we think, well, it's nothing. And I'm here to tell you that's a lie, because little things are what God uses. Little is much if God is in it. When you place your little in the hands of God, of a big God, he works miracles. I mean, he took basically a Happy Meal from a kid and fed 5,000. You think about that. Mom thought the boy needed lunch and got enough for it says a small child's lunch. And Jesus said to the disciples, hey, what do we got out there? And the disciples said, nothing. And Jesus went. And they said, oh yeah, forgot about it. We got a Happy Meal here. And Jesus fed 5,000 people. There's a place in the Bible, I think it's, let's see if I got it written out someplace. Exodus chapter 4, God comes to Moses and says, what do you got in your hand? He said, I got a stick. Listen, that's not much. If God came to you and said, what do you got? And you say, well, I got a stick. Now, for my grandson Asher, that would be an upgrade. He's about outgrown that, but he likes sticks. Stop obsessing over what you don't have and start obsessing what you do have. I don't have any money. I don't have a good job. I don't have a good car. He said, this is Elijah. He says, this is what you do. You go up and down the street and borrow jugs and bowls from all your neighbors, and not just a few. Get all you can. Then come home and lock the doors behind you, you and your sons. Now, this is really important. This next slide here, look what it says. It says, pour oil. Everybody say pour. Pour, not poor, pour. Pour. Pour oil in each container when it's full, set aside. Now, the funny thing is that she did it. I think they went out and they got all these pots and jugs, this says, and containers and from everybody, and they must have been thinking, what's this lady doing? And she gets her little bit of oil, she takes it out, and very careful, because if she spills it, that's all she's got. And she starts, can you imagine what happens when she starts pouring it into that vessel, and it just keeps pouring? It just keeps pouring. It just keeps pouring. This is money. This is valuable. It isn't valuable when it's 25 cents, but it's valuable when it becomes $1 and it becomes $10 and becomes more and more and more. And she locked the doors. She filled them. She locked the doors. She did what he said. She locked the door behind her and sons, and they brought the containers to her, and she filled them. And when all the jugs and bowls were full, she said to one of her sons, another jug, please. And he said, that's it. There's no more jugs. And then the oil stopped. That's when you wish, man, I wish I got more jugs. If this woman would have never poured, she would have never seen the multiplication. Which brings us to number 3. God only multiplies what we pour out in faith and not what we store up in fear. I know it's an unpopular subject. I've been burned so many times preaching about tithing that I just don't even want to do it anymore. The last time we talked about it, I actually let 3 people from the church talk about it because, well, everybody thinks that's all you ever preach about. But if you come to our church very much, I hardly ever talk about it. But, needless to say, I bet you could, after service, go to everybody in this church and ask them what happened after you tithed, the tithers, people who've tithed, and you're going to get a good response. Just going to get a good response. It just happens that way. I've yet to find hardly anybody who's ever said, well, we tithed and it got worse. Debbie and I, we learned this early in our ministry because we tithed before we got into the ministry. But when we went into the ministry for the first several years, we were in what in our denomination called mission churches. Mission churches were usually very small congregations. And when we were in Stockton, food stamps came in the offering. Food stamps. People with nothing were giving something. Because, see, they had something, and they realized there was something there. Now, in a missions church, because there's so little money coming in, what we received for salary, we don't here. They give me a very good salary here. But what we received as a salary was about 75% of what came in. So if $100 came in that week, which never saw $100, but if $10 came in, including food stamps that week, we would get $7.50. One time I got about 72 cents in my tithe check. I mean, my Personal, it's about 72 cents. And I cashed that check because we needed it. And I wish I had that check, because would that be cool in my office, a check, my first check for 72 cents. We get about 75% of it. So that's my logic. Get my logic here. I decided I wasn't going to tithe. Because if I tithe, I'm going to get 75% of it back the next week. Like I give $1 in the tithe, and then I get 75%, and then I tithe 75%, and I get, I don't know. You figure the math. See, I was redundant. There's no logic there. So we decided we wouldn't tithe. And we like to die. We had no food. We got sick. I mean, it was horrible. But when we tithe, see, it doesn't take long. I told somebody that I may not be a smart man, but I can figure this stuff out. And so we started tithing our dollar that came back 75 cents, and something happened. Debbie got a job. God blessed her with a job, an amazing job, a job in a penthouse in Los Angeles. When she went up to apply, here she is, we're just kids, and we've not had many jobs. I think she worked at a fabric store for a while. And so she walks into this penthouse, and a big insurance company, and the lady who's interviewing her, which it was her boss, was interviewing her, and Debbie said all of a sudden she just turned bright red. You know, she's having a hot flash. She said, I never do this. And she was just manifesting, and she said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to hire you right now. Our first check was more money than we had made the last year. I'm a believer in tithing. God can do more with your 90% than you can do with your 100%. And that doesn't make sense. The math, right, Bob? You're an accountant. That doesn't make sense. But God's way of addition has something to do with multiplication. That's what I know. A lot of people say, well, if I had more, I'd give more. Jesus says you won't. Look at this. This is Luke. This is I like the message. For some reason, I got on a message this week. Jesus went on to make these comments to me. If you're honest, that's faithful. In small things, you'll be honest in big things. If you're a crook in small things, you'll be a crook in big things. If you're honest with a small job, why would he put you in charge of the store? Do you know what we did as a church right in the middle of COVID? I called Jason. I said, tell me the first time when we started tithing again, the church. This church, every time you tithe, 10% of it goes outside the church. Well, we weren't doing that because we were in the middle of COVID. We were out of our church. We were in a theater. We were praying around. We were praying in a little lobby that was so close people couldn't walk. To walk from the front door to the bathroom, you had to walk through what we called our little prayer area. Finances were bad. People were afraid. People were storing up instead of pouring out. And we decided, somebody, I think it was Jackie, said, is our church tithing? I thought, no. You know how much, there's nothing coming in right now. And honestly, we began to tithe in the middle of COVID. The church did. We took several ministries and began to send out 10% out to those churches. Churches that had more money than they could ever want. Ministries that are worldwide. They don't need our little meager amount. See, logic always stops us from doing that, but something happened in that. Our little church, which still, we're no mega church. Still, God has blessed and blessed and blessed and blessed and blessed and blessed. So I'll ask you this question. If you're not seeing a blessing of provision, whatever that is, if the blessing has stopped flowing, could it be that you stopped pouring? Well, Debbie and I haven't had a good couple of years. We have been hit emotionally. We have been hit financially. We have been hit physically. But we made a decision. I mean, there are times I think, you know what? You people want to come to church? Well, I don't want to come to church. I'm sorry to be so honest with you, but during the summer I thought, why should I even study for the group of people that's coming? The only reason they're here is they got no money to go away. I'm not pouring out anymore. I told Debbie, I'll just start preaching 3 points in a poem. By the way, there's 3 points in the sermon. I got no poem. I got nothing. Well, we did. We decided not to do that. I mean, we talk that way. Do you ever do that? Oh, just me? Okay, me and Robert. Yeah, we get all upset. Where are you, God? Look what I'm doing. Look who I am and what you're messing with. We decided we were going to, listen, we found something. Yesterday we talked about this again. This is just the devil trying to distract us. That's a huge thing for Debbie. You pray for Debbie. She has to put up with me. We're not going to let Satan distract us from what God has called us to do. We're going to start focusing on what we got. I mean, remember this. This is really the sermon. God only starts multiplying when you begin pouring. Did I say this in the main service? Or I probably mentioned this a couple of times, but it's been amazing to me because this week, from Monday on, I haven't been able to walk. My knee, I got inflamed. My knee swelled up. I had some surgery done on it, and it just swelled up. And I really don't know that I did anything. I didn't do anything to it, but it just got terrible. I mean, I couldn't sleep at night. We're trying heating pads and cold pads. We're praying. I'm declaring. I'm binding the devil. I'm binding the knee. I'm doing everything. Binding the government. Anybody can think of prayer. I'm doing everything I can. And really, it would get better, and then it would get worse, and it would get better, and get worse. And so we were out to dinner. Did I say this? Jackie said she didn't feel good, so I prayed for her. Because by the way, I like praying for people. But I prayed for her. And then I realized when we got home, my knee wasn't hurting. Like, I prayed for her, and I got the healing. Sorry about that. It just all came back. See, if you pour, as long as you're pouring out, you say, well, God, heal me, heal me, heal me, heal me. And we're not pouring out. I would say, man, if you don't have, and there's a deficit financially, spiritually, emotionally, you feel, I'm feeling bad. I'm hurting. I don't know what's going on in my life. I think I'm just going to pout for a couple of weeks. God can do nothing with that. It says it right in the Bible. I can't do anything with pouting. That's the message. If you want, see, God's ways are not our ways. His math is messed up. If you want to get, you got to give. If you want to be on top, you got to serve. It's all backwards. It's all messed up. We can't figure it out because we try to live according to this world. But Jesus said, I've overcome this world. And he came preaching a kingdom. Where in the kingdom there's peace and there's joy and there's prosperity and there's health. And we can receive it. In Jesus' name.
We hope you've enjoyed this message from Grace Church. Make sure to stay connected throughout the week online at gchurch.us and on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week.